Hi, my name is Mike. I'm the CEO and founder of Loti, and we wanted to put this video together given all the tragic events that are happening right now in California and specifically down in LA, to really try to help people with some actionable advice and a framework for thinking through all the sort of ensuing problems and issues that they're going to have to kind of tackle over the next few years. In short, I'm a fellow victim. I was burned in 2019, and I'll give you some additional information about that. But back in 2019 and 18 and 17, there was also thousands of people that got burned. And even up till today in 2025, roughly 40% of the county hasn't actually been rebuilt yet. It's 40%. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, which is why we want to try to help everybody today. Um, so as I mentioned, I was a victim in 2019 in the Kincaid fire. Everybody's story is unique. Everybody's story is different. In my case, we were actually away from our home. It's a second home, and we were away at my daughter's college, and we were actually sent a live feed of the firemen actually fighting the fire on our house. It was incredible. It was a propane tank exploding, etc. And they weren't able to save most of the main properties, so it was a total loss of the primary property. But the house itself, actually, they did survive. We were scorched a little bit, but we had a ton of partial damage, smoke damage in the home. Uh, a few weeks later, then, because there's no power to the area, thieves moved in and vandalized the place over the course of a few days, and they vandalized and looted. So not only did they steal couches and rugs and things of that nature, but they also ripped out copper out of the walls. They tore out electrical fixtures and plumbing fixtures, etc. So again, another partial loss. And those two events combined really threw us, number one, through a completely emotional, traumatic experience that I'm sure a lot of you are going through right now. And then number two, then set us down a very complicated path to understanding all of these things that happen. And in short, we're kind of all going through this together, right? And when this happens, the responsibility of homeownership just kind of comes down and just hits you just right away. And you have to learn things around finance and construction and insurance, and all these things happen all at once. And so it becomes very, very complicated. And that's why we built Loti. And I just 2 seconds on it, but basically we founded Loti over the last few years in order to help folks like us. It's a recovery platform. It consists of three primary things. Number one, a ton of free content. So hundreds of articles and thousands of glossary terms, dozens of downloadable docs, all in one place, all free. And we'll give you some examples throughout this whole video of some of the advice that you can hope to find in there. Secondly, we also have a concierge service or with licensed public adjusters and private adjusters. Ours have decades of experience. They're quite a bit different in how we actually operate. We'll get into it a little bit. And then finally, just a little tidbit, we also have a huge technology suite coming this summer that's really going to help a lot of people navigate this process on their own. So in the context, that's our kind of an introduction. So in the context of this video itself, we thought it would really be helpful to, number one, provide an overarching framework for how to think through all the decisions that are coming your way. It's impossible, frankly, to kind of nail every single question that's going to happen over the next few years, but it's important to at least have a framework for making decisions. And then the second thing we'll do is then dive into some really specific actionable tips that'll dive in and really help you as we go through the process. And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit more about Loti. So first off, framework. What do I mean by that? So at a high level, think of three things as you're going through making a decision around debris or where you're living or you're hiring your contractor, whatever the case is. And number one, knowledge is power. It sucks. You're gonna be in the deep end of the pool, you already are, and you really are gonna have to understand a lot of the things that are coming down the pike at you. Briefly mentioned earlier around financing and insurance. Gonna have to understand some tough terms, like what is depreciation, understanding construction and permits, understanding what is debris removal. Those types of things, they can get complicated, and every decision is sort of sends you down one path or another, so it's important to really be informed. So number one, knowledge is power. Number two, time. So time is a really big aspect of this particular event, and that's because of something that's called demand surge. And demand surge, you probably have heard of. It's been in the national news from things like Katrina and Harvey, some major hurricanes, the wildfires that we experienced in 17, 18, and 19. And largely it's being treated as a sort of an economic issue that happens. In short, demand surge is when you have an increased demand in a very short amount of time, and it directly affects things like material supplies, labor supplies, and the associated costs. And it's absolutely going to be happening in LA. That said, I'd like you to think about demand surge and broaden the scope of it a little bit more. Think a little bit more about just not just materials and labor, but the process of demand surge actually starts now. It even already started. You can think about in terms of the housing surge that has already happened, where prices have gone up, and it's been really hard for a lot of you to actually find a place to actually live after the hotels and finding a long-term rental. I'd like you to think about that as that's part of demand surge because we now have literally thousands and thousands of people accessing our local economy. So it's going to happen on housing and it's going to continue to happen. It's going to happen on debris removal, which we're going to talk about in a second. It's going to happen when you try to get a survey or engineering help, or when you actually go to the counter at the county to try to actually get your permits approved. And all the way through, including construction with your contractor, finding labor, getting lumber and roofing shingles and everything else that's included. But just keep in mind that it's not just the materials and labor. It literally is every part of this process is going to happen. And at a high level, from a decision making standpoint, I just want you to try to think of trying to stay ahead, using knowledge, understanding what the decision constitutes at that time, and then trying to move forward and try to stay ahead of the demand surge that's absolutely coming. That's two. Third and final piece of this sort of framework is community. And we've been in on a number of neighborhood Zooms. We've been talking to a number of neighborhoods and sort of local kind of coalitions or syndicates, and that's fantastic. It's great to sort of see blocks of neighbors getting together, or congregations in churches, or schools coming together, and for sharing of information. And that's absolutely something everybody should be doing. But again, I'd like you to try to take it one step further, where working together beyond just communications and actually sharing resources. Working together, you can actually create purchasing power if you work together. You can actually hire a contractor to take care of 5, 10, 15 homes at once. You can begin buying materials together in advance. You can warehouse things long term. So when you're thinking about getting personal property delivered, if you came out of a 3 or a 4-bedroom home and now you're living in a 2-bedroom condo for the next couple of years, it's gonna be pretty hard to get deliveries there of all of the furniture that you're gonna have to rebuy. That's a problem, and you can't really put it into a public storage unit because you can't really take deliveries there, and you certainly can't do it on a daily basis. So again, if you work together as a community and you think about warehousing, think about purchasing, containers, storage, hiring contractors, hiring services, that really helps from a flexibility standpoint, a scheduling standpoint. So you basically, folks can kind of move those resources and materials and deliveries around for you as you kind of go through this process. So I'd like to encourage you to think together as a community. And again, of course, share that information, but encourage you to try to even take it a step further and actually work together over the ensuing few years, because this is going to take some time. So overall, just think of that as a framework, and now we're going to get into some specific examples. But again, just in the back of your mind, think knowledge. I've got to learn some stuff. I'll give you some stuff. Number two, time. We want to stay ahead of demand surge. And number three, community. Really, really working together, not just sharing phone numbers. Let's dive into it a little bit. So, first off, in this kind of a situation, you absolutely need to understand your insurance policy. Most of us, when we bought our first home, get our mortgage, we're required to get insurance, and we get it. And we don't really even know what's in it. There's something that's called a declarations page. That's a couple sheets. Maybe we skimmed it. We said, "Oh yes, my house, I need $500,000 in coverage or $700,000," and that's kind of it. We kind of put it away. And unfortunately, at this point now, you really have to understand both the details, but also understand even how an insurance policy is constructed. Um, we have a book written on this. It's on Amazon. So online and in this book, we have an article or a little story called The Fairy Tale. And the fairy tale is basically about Bill the friendly giant. Okay. And so Bill basically can envision this big 100-foot tall, 200-foot tall giant, whatever it is, standing over your home. And he just sort of reaches down and he grabs your home and rips it out of the ground with a big paw of his hand, right? And so what the structures that are remaining on that property, fences, sheds, detached garages, those are secondary structures. That's under your coverage B in your insurance policy. So Bill then takes your home and he shakes everything out, right? So the stuff that falls out, maybe on your neighbor's property, but it falls out, that's your personal property. Things like couches, clothing, mirrors that are hanging on the wall, things of that nature. That's your personal property. That's in coverage C. What's remaining in his hand is A. That's your primary dwelling. So beyond things that you would immediately think of, like the lumber and the roofing shingles and tile, also think about things that are really permanently attached to the home, like water heaters, air conditioning units, things of that nature. That's actually part of your coverage A. So you've got A, B, the structures that are left down on the ground, C, the stuff that fell out, and then finally D. So loss of use, you also see here the terms additional living expenses. So that D is essentially there for you to find a new place to live, right? So a lot of people are just going to lean into that from a rental standpoint, and there's some additional things to think about within that coverage that we're going to talk about really briefly. But in short, that's kind of how to think through it. Is you've got A, B, C, the stuff that fell out, and then D is sort of your umbrella or your parachute to try to land safely over the next few years. On top of that, there's also a number of other endorsements or riders. You might hear the term rider. Those are kind of like mini coverage buckets, and they cover a pretty specific thing, like landscaping, for instance, would be an endorsement of like how would I replace a tree, which is something we'll be accessing. We're going to give you some examples of additional endorsements. There are things like inflation guard and ordinance law, and some pretty big words in there, replacement cost. And so we'll go through some of those things. But in short, endorsements and riders are basically little mini coverages that sit on top of those big four. A little footnote, there's two other things that are sitting in your policy. They're coverage kind of E and F. You'll see a section 2. In most of the cases in this particular instance, they're not really relevant. In short, it's liability and medical expenses for others. So I guess in our former fairy tale, if you had people over and they kind of fell out and got hurt, they might have some medical expenses. Your own medical expenses are covered by your own health insurance. But so this is medical expenses for others that would be in your home and the associated liability with that type of stuff. It's more for like when somebody kind of trips on your sidewalk or your walkway out front, or somebody trips on the stairs or something like those sorts of events. Maybe your kid hits a baseball through a neighbor's window. So in short, that's E and F. So that's kind of one thing. This is like understanding the policy. I think everybody in a household should understand it. Generally speaking, somebody's running point and really getting into the details of different things. But collectively, and just sitting down at a dining room table type of a thing, end of day, it's important to really just understand the broad strokes. Okay, let's get into a little bit. I did uh, allude to housing and coverage days. Let's give you a couple additional thoughts and tips around that. So, in addition to rent, let's just say, for instance, that your mom is living with you or dad is living with you, that type of a thing, maybe in an ADU type of a scenario, and mom is in a wheelchair or dad's in a walker type of a thing. Well, that coverage can also help you in your new space because, in addition to just finding you a place to live, that coverage is intended to make sure it's a safe place to live that's comparable to where you were. So if you need to add a wheelchair ramp or if you need to add grab bars in the shower, those types of things probably are covered by your coverage D. It's a good thing to ask your insurance company whether or not they are before you go tearing up a wall, but it's something to look out for. In addition, given that we're talking about LA at the moment, we all know how bad the commutes are in LA. And so if you were to move from whatever 5 or 10 miles away from work and all of a sudden you move down to the OC or Manhattan Beach or something, it could be quite a bit further. And those associated travel logs, that distance from getting from your new home to your existing home or to work, those also might be able to be taken care of by insurance. So keep an eye out for that. Again, have a conversation with your insurance. There's a number of other things as well. Again, I point you to our articles online, but there's a number of other things that you can kind of think through as well. All right. Second thing or third thing, I guess. Um, at the moment, there's a lot of topic around, or a lot of discussion around debris removal. And debris removal is a really big thing. And right now, the EPA, of course, is moving through neighborhoods and removing hazardous materials, liquids, household chemicals, oil, things of that nature, asbestos, like really, really bad stuff. They've got to do their job. The next thing that happens after that is that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to come through and basically clear off properties with the big stuff, right? The big burnt pieces of your home, honestly. And that's a big job, and they're fantastic. They will move through, but it does take a fair amount of time. Going back to demand surge, I mean, they are going to be moving basically as a wave throughout a community, throughout your neighborhoods. And that type of timing may or may not work for you. It's important to understand that if you have coverage, basically, if you don't have coverage or you're highly underinsured, then maybe skip ahead. But if you do have insurance coverage, and this would be underneath a debris removal endorsement, it's worth understanding how much it might cost to do it on the private side because you'd be able to actually kind of move ahead of the line a bit. And once the EPA comes through, clear the remaining debris off of your property, and then get started on surveys and engineering and plans so you can kind of get ahead of the crowd when we get to the counter and contractors, etc. But that said, it comes with a big, big caveat. Well, a couple. Number one, make sure you're covered. Otherwise, this is a cash out scenario and you probably want to conserve your cash. So that's big. And number two, you've got to make sure that the person or the firm that you hire is licensed. And I don't just mean a licensed general contractor. In short, back up in Sonoma, just rewinding back up there, a number of folks just sort of thought my general contractor can handle it. They were pretty innocent in the process and thought that they could remove that material themselves. The reality is that they can't. There's a series of things that they need to kind of abide by: chemical testing, where are you taking this stuff? And essentially, you need to be licensed in this particular field. You need to be a licensed debris removal engineer. It's super, super important because if you don't do this with the right permitting, and if you don't do this with the right testing, and if you don't take it to the right places, then you won't actually be able to build. And essentially, the town or the city or the county will actually say, no, we need to understand how this was removed and inspect it accordingly before you can build. And in that case, there isn't an engineer in the world that's going to come over and say this was removed correctly because they weren't part of the process. So part of that 40% of folks that have not rebuilt up in the wine country are folks that accidentally just had their general contractor remove material on their own. It's a big problem. Please steer clear of that. If you have any questions, please ask the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or whomever. It's a really important kind of fork in the road. But there is a reason to consider private. Just be really careful when you do it. All right, let's move on. So the other thing is kind of happening quite a bit right now, sort of in parallel. There's a number of things happening in parallel, but is inventory management, personal property, basically, what did I lose? And this could be in total, and this could also be in partial, but let's just kind of keep it in total for just math. Um, so in your policy, you have generally there are two major types of policies around personal property. One is called ACV, actual cash value, and the other is called RCV, replacement cost value. And they're pretty different. So actual cash value is essentially what is the value of that particular couch, let's call it, the day before the fire. So let's say you bought a couch 7 years ago for $1,000. Maybe the day before the fire, it's now worth $300. And that's because of depreciation. Depreciation is a big word, but it's something you've got to understand. Essentially, when we buy, maybe our dad, when he used to say that hey, you buy the car and as soon as you drive it off the lot, it loses 30%. Well, he's right. That's depreciation. It's a little more complex than that, but the story rings true. So a couch, for instance, may depreciate at 7 or 10% a year, depending on your insurance carrier's depreciation tables or how you want to position that particular couch. It's beyond age. It's also condition and things like that. But Let's say again, you bought that couch for $1,000 7 years ago, and the day before the fire, it's $300. That $700 is depreciation. So in an ACV policy, you're going to get $300 from your insurance company, or should, and that's it. In an RCV policy, you now have the ability to actually go back to insurance and gather replacement cost for that couch. So the way in practically the way it's going to work is your insurance company would still going to pay the depreciated value up front, that $300. But then in addition, then you have to then go and prove that the replacement cost is that full $1,000, and you go back to whatever, IKEA, to go get your couch for $1,000, and then insurance is going to give you that 700. So it's a long process, obviously, because we're not buying a couch today. We have no place to store it today. But thinking ahead around how this actually really works, it's kind of the difference between ACV, RCV, and how depreciation really works in this. It's a really important concept to understand. Say, in addition, there's insurance companies right now, they need to actually offer you 30% of that coverage C of all the stuff that came out. They need to kind of offer that to you to kind of get you going. So if you had $100,000 of personal property coverage, they should be offering you $33,000 in cash right now to cover that. But keep in mind that you now actually have to prove that that $33,000 was actually property that you need to get reimbursed for. So it's going to start with ACV, and then eventually, when you have your replacements in there, then you can basically build up and get that full $100,000. It's a long process, but those are kind of the broad strokes around it. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about your primary home, A, because everybody wants to think about that. And so A has its own intricacies. In short, you may look at your policy, and again, I'm just going to use round numbers here, but your primary dwelling might have $1 million of coverage, and maybe in a great scenario, your insurance company is like, hey, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you out. We've heard that a lot. I'm going to pay you out for A. That might sound good. Maybe that sounds like a nice offer, but there's some other things. Those endorsements, those little coverages that are sitting in there, could have a really, really big impact on what that paying out means. And I'll give you a couple examples. So one is called extended replacement coverage, which is kind of a combination of a few of the things that we're talking about. So extended replacement is, okay, well now if my house cost $1 million to rebuild the day before the fire, when demand surge hits and this thing comes through like a tidal wave against materials and labor, a couple of years from now, it's not going to cost $1 million anymore. It might cost 1.2, $1.3 million. You're going to see real increases. That's what extended replacement cost says, is essentially covers that difference of it's no longer one, maybe it's another $200,000 or $300,000 type of a thing on top of A. So take a look at that. It can be called a few different things, but extended replacement cost is kind of the big thing. You'll see it in caps somewhere, and it should give you a percentage or some sort of a number. So be very well aware of that. There's a couple other things. There's inflation guard coverage. Inflation is similar, smaller dollar amounts because it's mapping against inflation. I don't have to dive into inflation on this. I think we've all been well trained over the last few years, given the current environment. But in short, hopefully you should have some inflation coverage in there. It shouldn't really have a number per se because it maps against some pretty thick calculus tables that they'll make available to you over the coming months. But in short, it should be some additional money that you should be able to access from your insurance plan. Lastly, there's another one called ordinance law. Ordinance law sort of weaves in, it's great in total losses. It's actually especially valuable in partial loss. So if you're got scorched on part of your home and you have to replace part of your home, but the rest of the home is standing, but then the rest of your home may or may not be up to current code. Obviously, in California, we've got a lot of codes. So things like if you had knob and tube wiring running throughout your home, or iron pipes, or whatever the case is, asbestos ceilings. So the city or the county or whomever, your planning commission, when you go to repair your home, they might require you to actually bring the rest of the home up to code because they want the home to be safe. That's what that ordinance coverage is going to be able to do for you. So even though you have damage on one part of your house that's maybe, I don't know, $100,000, that ordinance coverage might provide you an additional 20, 30, $50,000 to bring the rest of your house up to current code. So it's a really important thing to understand. This isn't just for total loss, it's for partial loss as well. You should absolutely take a look in there. And while we're on the topic of partial, so as I mentioned earlier, in addition to the fire damage, we also had quite a bit of smoke damage, and smoke is a tricky thing. And to be clear, there's no real right solution for every person or every household of kind of how to manage this. In short, most people that we've talked to, they come home and it smells like a fireplace. It's like, yeah, that's kind of what happens, right? This ash and soot gets into your home and it settles on all of your soft goods. And there's a number of things that are going to happen here, right? So there's probably a number of cleaning companies cruising around your neighborhood saying that they're going to clean things. Your insurance company also may recommend their own cleaning company to come in and clean. ServPro is a big one, for example. That's okay. You need to have that actually. So if you're insured, you absolutely want to get your house professionally cleaned, not by a janitorial service. Please don't try to do this stuff yourself if you're insured, and and use a professional cleaning service. That said, there's a few things to be aware of even on top of that. Number one, they're cleaning companies. They're not replacement companies. So they might clean your couch, they might clean your cushioned chairs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are clean and safe. Same thing with like beds and mattresses and pillows. So be really careful to make sure that you really feel that that is clean, because if not, you might have to have it replaced, and it's a conversation with your insurance company. Couple other things to think about. When smoke hits your house, or you have like maybe a scorching on the side of your home, you'll notice that smoke obviously curls up and it'll curl up underneath your eaves. Well, underneath your eaves, you'll see that there should be a number of vents that go into your attic. Good attics should have ventilation. Well, that smoke is actually going to go through those ventilation screens and can settle on your insulation up in your attic. A lot of folks when they're walking through their home aren't really thinking about their attic. Please go to your attic. Take a look at the insulation. If you have soot on your insulation, it can't be cleaned. You're going to want to have that remediated and replaced. A lot of these cleaning companies will do that for you. You might need a licensed contractor. It's kind of sticky, and insulation isn't a great thing to kind of do on your own with all that fiberglass, but make sure that your home truly is safe in the attic as well. Last kind of thing, a little tip on this too is sort of back to what is clean. It talked a lot about soft goods like linens and pillows, but don't forget about some of the hard stuff. Your electronics, big thing. So ash and soot is made of carbon. Carbon is a conductor. So when that lands inside an electronic, inside of like your nice desktop computer or inside your flat screen TV, it actually can short circuit it, and it can certainly degrade the life of that computer or TV or whatever. Be really careful. Just because it turns on doesn't necessarily mean that that's the life expectancy, that now all of a sudden I'm going to have this TV or computer for another 10 years. That may or may definitely not be true. If there's ash and soot sitting on top of that, be careful. So at the end of the whole process, it is up to you to say, yes, this is clean. Different insurance companies are going to use different ways to measure what is clean. The sniff test. Hey, it doesn't smell anymore in here. It smells great. That's not good enough. Use chemical wipes. You can get them on Amazon. Use chemical wipes, wipe down, ensure that your house to your standards is clean. You want to make sure that it's safe, not just for you, but also for babies, adults, if you sell it, a whole bunch of stuff. So you've got to make sure and use those chemical wipes. And if you're in real doubt, then talk to a professional, talk to a PA, public adjuster, which we'll talk about in a second. But you really want to get a good understanding of that. So in review, that we've got a way to kind of understand how to make decisions. I can't go through the 800 decisions that are coming your way, but keeping in mind that knowledge is power, time is a big thing, demand surge is coming, and really working together as a community, and then trying to weave those into specific examples. You've got to understand your policy. There are some things within your housing, within debris, within personal property, within your primary dwelling, and also some tips in there for partial and total loss. Now, all of that said, why all of these tips, right? Why are we doing all this advice and everything? Well, again, I'm a fellow victim. I personally understand, and we at Loti completely understand. That's why we're giving all of this content away for free. It took us well over a year just to put together the library of information, year and a half. So please use it. It's free. There's no strings attached. Just please read. In addition, if you need more help, because there's a lot of stuff that can happen, you might be interested in hiring a PA. PA is a public adjuster. We have some, I'll get into why ours are a little bit different, but you've probably already been approached by a public adjuster service of some sort. In general, PAs earn between 10, 15, even upwards of 25% of your claim. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? That means going back to, I think I said $1 million for your dwelling or whatever. Say you had $1 million insurance policy. That means that a PA is going to charge, let's call it 15%, 150 grand to manage that for you. That may or may not be a good decision for you. That means that out of that $1 million that you may get out of insurance, that you will keep 850 and you're going to pay that PA $150,000 to manage your claim. In a lot of cases, it's a really, really good decision, but just like anything else, there are good PAs and there are bad PAs. Just like anything, there's good contractors, bad contractors, good doctors, good lawyers, etc. Right? So you've got to be careful. There's good and then there's bad. And at a high level, the way to think about whether or not you need a PA is they kind of do two things really, really well. Well, they should. We do it exceptionally well, and I'll get into why. But they should really organize all of your information and your claim together. And as I said, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of coverages, and there's a lot of buckets to really understand. And package that to work with your insurance in order to negotiate with insurance on your behalf. They represent you. Insurance companies obviously have an army of people. This is their job. And you have signed what amounts to a legal contract, which is your homeowner's policy. They have lawyers. They've done this a million times before. Unfortunately, it is the world we live in. And this is your first go round, hopefully. And so you don't know everything. You could be the smartest guy in the room, but be careful because you aren't the most informed guy in the room or woman in the room. That's what a PA can do. The best ones can do that for you. Now, for ours specifically, we're quite a bit different than a normal PA. Um, First off, our guys have decades of experience, and you may hear that from other PAs, right? But in a lot of cases, that decades of experience, that's the one guy you're going to be talking to, and then they're going to hand off to the junior folks as they go through the claims because they're experiencing demand surge. We're quite a bit different. As I mentioned earlier, we have a tech stack on our back end that is phenomenal. So our tech suite that's going to be available for consumers is not available until the summer, unfortunately. Sorry. But the whole back end actually is available to help our PAs actually move quite a bit faster on your behalf. They use tech to move quickly. We combine decades of experience, that knowledge to help you through it, and we use technology to move faster. We can organize your claims faster. We can pull inventory together faster. We know how to get estimates together faster. We can do all of this stuff much faster to try to get you ahead of the crowd. And the whole process, we like to think of it as a sort of a six-star process where it's very hyper efficient. On top of that, we also aren't going to just sort of, hey, claim is closed and leave you. In marketing terms, PAs are more or less experience 100% breakage. That means that after your claim is closed, you and your PA say goodbye and you probably are never going to talk to them again. That's not the case with us. We actually refer to ourselves as a concierge. We have licensed PAs within the concierge services, but we want to stay with you this whole time. We're going to try to help you since we have all this information in our tech stack. We can now package that appropriately for your next insurance policy because you're going to make it through this. And the next time around, you're going to be more informed on what policy you need. All those documents are going to be organized. All that inventory is going to be organized. Everything is going to be there so you can make a wise decision on your next policy. And then even after that, we're going to check in on you on an annual basis, make sure that you haven't done any updates, any remodels, got engaged, whatever the case may be, things that may affect your homeowner's policy and that so we can kind of keep that up to date on your behalf. So just keep that in mind. And of course, anybody that's working with us is going to get a sneak peek into the tech stuff when we're ready to unveil it in the summer. So it's pretty cool. So I kind of want to leave it there. Again, went through an overall framework of sort of how to think about all these decisions. We tried to give you some really, really actionable advice on things that can try to help everybody. And then if you need additional help, we're here for you. We understand we're fellow victims, we're professionals, we're technologists, we're designers, and we are licensed PAs. And this can really help you through it. So I'll just leave you with our company tagline, which is more or less, we want you to rebuild faster. We want you to recover stronger. And most importantly, let's rebuild together. Take care.